Rowan Hale hadn't spoken to another living soul in 11 days. That was the life he'd chosen. High trails, clean silence, no questions. Then she appeared at his cabin door in the dead of summer, her face telling a story, her mouth refused to speak. Handprints, dark and unmistakable, pressed into her skin like a brand. Rowan looked at those marks for a long time. Then he picked up his rifle. If you've ever stayed silent when you should have spoken, this story is for you. Subscribe to our channel, follow every part to the end, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The summer of 1883 came to the Bitterroot Mountains hard and without apology. By June, the snowmelt had long since carved its way down through the granite and pine, and what was left behind was a heat that pressed against a man's chest like a second skin. The kind of heat that made animals move slower, made water taste like iron, made the high trails feel like the inside of a furnace stoked by a god who had stopped caring about the people below. Rowan Hale didn't mind it. He'd been living at 8,000 feet for going on 6 years, and the mountain had long since burned away every comfort he used to think he needed. He had his cabin. He had his well. He had 300 acres of slope and timber that no deed recorded and no man had ever come to argue. Up here, the only law was weather. The only neighbor was wind. The only clock was the angle of light crossing his floor each morning when he rose before it. He was 35 years old, and he looked like something the mountain had decided to keep. 6'4" in his boots, with hands wide enough to palm a splitting log and shoulders that had absorbed enough winters to stop apologizing for the space they took. He wore a sun-faded canvas shirt and trail trousers tucked into boots that had been resoled twice and still weren't finished. His jaw carried a beard he trimmed once a month with a hunting knife and a piece of tin nailed to the cabin wall. His eyes were the color of creek water, gray and green, depending on the light, and they had the particular stillness of a man who had learned to watch everything and react to almost nothing. He wasn't cold. People who met him said cold. They were wrong. He was careful. There was a difference, and it mattered. That Tuesday morning, the 14th of June, though he only knew that because he'd been keeping a mark count on a post near the door since January, Rowan was splitting firewood behind the cabin when he heard the horse. Not hoofbeats on a trail, something slower, stumbling, a horse that had been pushed past its limit and was operating on stubbornness alone. He set the axe down against the stump and came around the side of the cabin without hurrying. Hurrying told whatever was coming that it had startled you. Rowan Hale did not get startled, but what he saw stopped him for a full 3 seconds. That was the longest he'd been still since the winter a black bear had walked onto his porch. The horse was a brown mare, probably 15 years old, with a loose shoe on her left rear and foam crusted along her neck. She'd been ridden hard through the night, he could tell from the dark sweat marks drying into patterns on her coat. And she'd come up the back trail, which meant whoever was riding her either knew this mountain or had followed the creek line on instinct and gotten lucky. The woman on her back had not dismounted so much as she had stopped holding on. She was slumped sideways against the mare's neck, her fingers still tangled loosely in the mane, her boots barely in the stirrups. She was young, early 20s he figured, with dark hair that had come entirely loose from whatever it had started in, and was hanging across half her face in dried knots. Her dress was light cotton summer weight, and it was torn at the shoulder and filthy from the trail. Rowan walked toward the horse slowly, the way you approached any animal in distress. The mare watched him with tired, trusting eyes and didn't move. He reached up and put his hand on the woman's arm. "Hey." Nothing. "Hey." Firmer. She made a sound. Not words, just a sound that came from somewhere low and exhausted in her chest. "You're going to fall," he said. "I'm going to take you down. Don't fight me." He got his hands under her arms and lifted her clear of the saddle in one motion, taking her weight fully before her legs could crumple. She was lighter than he expected, and heavier than she looked, the weight of someone who'd spent the night terrified and was now completely spent. He carried her inside. He'd laid her on his cot, the only bed in the cabin, a narrow frame he'd built himself from pine, with a cornhusk mattress and 2 wool blankets before he got his first clear look at her face. He stood there for a moment. The bruising on her left cheekbone was fresh. Not hours old, maybe a day, maybe less. Dark purple at the center, going to green-yellow at the edges, the kind of mark that meant a closed fist, not an open hand. Above it, closer to the temple, a cut had bled and dried without being cleaned. Her lower lip was split. Her right wrist, when he moved her arm to straighten it, showed the red-purple band of fingers, not one set. 2. Someone had grabbed her hard, and then someone else had grabbed her after. Rowan pulled a stool up beside the cot and sat down. He didn't touch her again. He folded his hands between his knees and looked at the floor for a long moment, while he decided something. Then he got up, poured water from the pitcher into the basin, found a clean piece of cloth, and came back. He cleaned the cut at her temple without waking her. He kept the cloth cool and changed the water twice. When he was done, he covered her with the lighter of the 2 blankets. Even in summer, the mountain nights came down cold, and went outside to water the mare and give her a bucket of grain. He didn't sleep that night. He sat in the chair by the door with his rifle across his knees and watched the trail down the mountain and thought about handprints. She woke near mid-morning the next day. He heard her before she said anything. The shift of weight on the cot, the sharp intake of breath that always came with waking up somewhere unfamiliar when you were afraid. He was at the table with coffee when she sat up. "You're safe," he said without turning around. "Coffee's on." Silence. "I'm not going to ask you anything," he said. "You don't have to explain a single thing to me. But you should eat." More silence. Then carefully, "Where am I?" "My cabin, up the north slope above the Bitterroot Valley." He poured a second cup and set it on the table. "You came to me. Your horse did anyway." He heard her feet find the floor. Slow. Testing. He still didn't turn. I wasn't trying to come here specifically," she said. Her voice was low and hoarse, like she'd been either crying or screaming at some point in the recent past and it hadn't recovered. I followed the creek. Maggie knows water." "Smart horse." A pause. "She's mine. My horse." "I know. Fed and watered her this morning. She's fine." He heard her stand. The slight hiss of breath when something hurt. He turned then because he needed to see where the hurt was, and found her standing at the edge of the cot with one hand braced on the wall, her eyes on him. She'd straightened her dress as best she could. Her hair was still a wreck, and the bruise on her face in the full morning light coming through the window was even darker than he'd registered the night before. She looked at him, looking at it. Her chin went up half an inch. Not defiant, defensive. The motion of someone who had gotten used to people having opinions about her face. "I fell," she said. Rowan picked up the coffee cup from the table and held it out toward her. "That's your business." She crossed the cabin and took the cup. He noticed she kept the table between them. He didn't move. He went to the stove and turned his attention to the pan he had going salt pork and cornbread. Nothing fancy, and gave her the space. "I'm Emily," she said finally. "Emily Carter." "Rowan Hale." "Do you live here alone?" "Yes." "How long?" 6 years, give or take." She was quiet for a moment. He could feel her trying to read him the way a person does when they're not sure yet whether they've landed somewhere safe or just somewhere different. "You didn't ask me who did that," she said. Her voice was careful. "No." "Most men would ask." "I'm not most men." Another silence. Then she sat down at the table, both hands wrapped around the cup, and for the first time since she'd woken up, she let some of the rigid tension go out of her shoulders. "It's not as bad as it looks," she said. Rowan put the food on the table and sat across from her. "Eat." She ate. He watched her try not to eat like someone who was starving and fail at it halfway through, and he got up and put more on her plate without comment. Chad. She stayed 3 days before she told him anything real. He didn't push. The mountain taught you patience the way nothing else did. You didn't rush weather. You didn't rush healing. You didn't rush a person who was still figuring out whether she was safe. He gave her the cot. He slept in the chair. He went about his days checking snares, splitting wood, patching the north wall of the lean-to, where something had gotten into the gaps over winter, and let her be still. On the second day, she started helping without being asked. She found the broom and swept the cabin out. She reorganized the dry goods shelf in a way that made more sense than the way he'd had it. She mended a tear in his spare shirt with a needle and thread from the kit in her saddlebag, and when he came in and found her sitting by the window doing it, she looked up like she expected him to tell her to stop. He said, "You don't have to do that." She said, "I know." She kept doing it. On the third day in the late afternoon, they were sitting on the porch, him on the step, her in the single chair he'd dragged out, watching the valley below go gold in the low sun. The heat had broken slightly, and the air smelled like pine and cut grass, and the distant suggestion of thunderstorms still days away. She said, "His name is Silas Granger." Rowan didn't move. He kept his eyes on the valley. "He owns most of the valley. The cattle routes, the feed contracts, half the buildings in Red Ridge." She said it the way you said things you'd said to yourself 100 times, flat and precise, like reading a list aloud. "He owns Calhoun, who's the sheriff. He owns the judge. He owns the men who ride for both of them." "You worked for him." "I cooked for the hands at the main ranch. Room and board wages every 2 weeks. Seemed safe enough at first." She stopped. Started again. "He came into the kitchen one night. Late. I was cleaning up. He said I owed him something for the room and the board and the security of working in a place where nobody bothered me." She said it plainly, without ornament, and Rowan understood exactly what Silas Granger had meant by security. "I told him no," Emily said. "I told him clearly, and I told him once. And then 2 of his men came to walk me back to the bunkhouse that night, and they stopped in the yard." She picked up the coffee cup she'd been holding and looked at it like she was checking whether it was still warm. "I got away. Barely. I got to Maggie and I rode." "Where were you headed?" "I don't know. Away." She finally looked at him. "I didn't have a plan, Rowan. I just rode." He nodded. "He's going to come looking," she said. "He owns this county. He'll tell Calhoun I stole something, or I know something, or he'll find a reason. He's good at reasons." "I know men like him." "Then you know they don't stop." "Yes," Rowan said. "I know that." She waited. The valley below burned gold and slow. "He's not going to touch you again," Rowan said. He said it like a fact about the weather, like something already decided. Emily looked at him for a long time. "You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." "No," he said. "I don't." He stood up from the step, brushed the dust from his hands, and went inside. She sat in the chair until dark came down over the mountains, and she thought about what it meant when a man who owed you nothing chose to give you something anyway. On the 4th morning, Rowan rode down to Red Ridge. He didn't tell her he was going until he was already saddled, and he only told her then because she came out of the cabin when she heard the horse, and looked at him with the particular sharpness of someone who understood what a man leaving meant. "I'm just going to town," he said. "Supply run. I'll be back before nightfall." "Don't," she said. "Don't what?" "Don't go in there asking about me. Don't—" She stepped off the porch and came toward him, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she didn't look careful. She looked afraid. "Rowan, if you ask about me in that town, Silas will know exactly where I am by sundown. I'm not going to ask about you." He settled the rifle across the front of the saddle. "I'm going to buy flour and salt and see what the town looks like these days." She stared at him. "I haven't been in Red Ridge in 8 months, he said. "That's a normal supply run. Nobody's going to think anything of it. And if someone recognizes your description, if Silas has put out word to watch for anyone from the mountain, then I'll know what kind of situation we're dealing with." He looked at her steadily. "Stay inside. Don't let smoke come from the chimney. It's summer, you don't need it. If you hear horses on the upper trail before I'm back, take Maggie and go north along the ridge. There's a trapper's shelter 2 miles up. Stay there and wait." Emily opened her mouth, closed it. "I'll be back before dark," he said again. He rode down the mountain, and she watched him go from the porch with her arms folded across her chest and her jaw set tight. Red Ridge, in the summer of 1883, was a town that had learned to pretend everything was fine. That was the first thing Rowan noticed when he came in off the North Road, not the heat rising off the packed dirt Main Street, not the sound of the mill running at the edge of town, not the cattle smell from the pens on the south end. What he noticed was how everyone moved, heads down, eyes sideways, the particular shuffling gait of people who had learned that being noticed was dangerous. He'd seen it before, in other towns, under other names. He tied his horse at the rail in front of Alderman's general store and went inside. Cal Alderman was behind the counter, a stocky man in his 50s with a gray mustache and the permanent squint of someone who spent a lot of time reading small print. He looked up when Rowan came in, and something moved across his face that wasn't quite welcome and wasn't quite fear. "Hail," he said. "Been a while." "8 months or so," Rowan said. He pulled his supply list from his shirt pocket and put it on the counter. "Got everything on that?" Cal looked at the list, looked at Rowan. "Most of it. I'm short on the good salt. Got coarse." "Coarse is fine." Cal started pulling items. He worked in silence for a minute, and Rowan stood at the counter and let the store settle around him, the smells of tobacco and dry goods and lamp oil, the sound of someone moving in the back room. "Quiet town these days," Rowan said. Cal's hands didn't stop moving. "Summer. People keep to themselves in the heat." Rowan turned slightly and looked out through the front window at the street. A woman crossed in the dust, walking fast, not looking at anyone. 2 men stood at the far end of the porch of what used to be the Red Ridge Hotel, and what was now, Rowan noted, called the Granger House in new lettering above the door. And they weren't doing anything in particular except existing in a way that suggested they were watching everyone else. "Those Granger's men," Rowan said. A pause in the pulling of supplies, brief. "They work for him, yeah? He's put men on the street. They're just standing there. Men who are just standing there don't need to be on both ends of the main street." Rowan looked back at Cal. "That's called a perimeter." Cal set the salt on the counter and met Rowan's eyes for the first time. "I'd recommend," he said quietly, "that you take your supplies and go home Hale. Come back in 8 more months." "Is that a warning, Cal?" "It's a suggestion, from someone who's been watching this town for the last year and doesn't much like what he's seen." Cal lowered his voice another notch. "Granger put out a word last week, looking for a young woman dark hair was working his ranch kitchen. Says she stole silver from the house." Rowan's expression didn't change. "Description matches nobody I've seen," Cal added. His eyes were steady. "And I look at every face that comes through that door." Rowan held his gaze. "How much do I owe you?" Cal told him. Rowan paid in coin and carried his supplies out to the horse. He was tying the saddlebag when the footsteps came up behind him. "You're Hale." Not a question. Rowan finished the knot before he turned. 2 men stood behind him, one blocky and bearded, the other younger and thin-faced with quick eyes. Both wore sidearms. Neither was wearing a badge, which told Rowan everything about what kind of authority they represented. "That's me," Rowan said. "You live up on the north slope," the blocky one said. "The mountain." "I do." "Lonely up there." "I like it that way." The thin-faced one smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. "Mr. Granger was wondering if maybe you'd seen anything up on your mountain lately. Tracks, signs of someone passing through." Rowan looked at him for a moment. "I see tracks up there all the time. Deer, elk, the occasional bear." "We're talking about a person. People don't come up my trail without an invitation." He untied his horse from the rail. "And I haven't been handing those out." The blocky one stepped slightly to the side. Not aggressive, just repositioning. The kind of casual movement that wasn't casual at all. "It'd be a good thing," he said, "if you kept your eyes open. Man who helps Mr. Granger is a man Mr. Granger remembers." "And a man who doesn't help?" Rowan asked. Neither of them answered. They didn't need to. Rowan put his foot in the stirrup and mounted. He looked down at them from the saddle with the same level, quiet attention he gave everything. "I'll keep that in mind," he said. He rode out of Red Ridge at a walk. He didn't look back, but he counted 3 more pairs of eyes on him from doorways and porches before he reached the North Road, and he noted each one, and he rode home thinking about a man who put watchers in a town the way a rancher put fence posts, regular, deliberate, covering every angle. Silas Granger wasn't looking for Emily because she'd taken silver. He was looking for her because she'd said no, and Silas Granger had built an empire on making sure that word didn't exist in his county. Rowan got back to the cabin an hour before dark. Emily was on the porch when he came up the last stretch of trail. She was standing with her arms crossed and her face tight, and when she heard the horse, she came to the edge of the steps and then stopped herself. He dismounted, tied the horse, started unloading the saddlebags. "Well," she said, "he's got men in town, at least 5 that I counted, probably more." He handed her the flour sack. "He's put out a story that you stole from him." "Of course he did. The sheriff will have a warrant ready whenever Granger wants to use it." He carried the rest of the supplies up the steps. "Cal Alderman didn't confirm you were here." "He won't." "Cal's a good man," Emily said quietly. "He's been a good man in a bad town for a long time." He looked like a man who was tired of it. They took the supplies inside and she helped him put them away. When it was done, she stood at the window with her back to him for a moment. "I should leave," she said. "If I stay here, you're in it too. You already are. You went into that town and now they know your face and they'll connect you to me." "They already did," Rowan said. "2 of his men stopped me at my horse, asked if I'd seen anyone on the mountain." She turned around. "What did you tell them?" "That I hadn't." "Rowan, you're not leaving," he said, not hard, not soft, just settled the way the mountain said things. "Not until you have somewhere to go. And even then, not down that road and not alone. You don't get to decide that." "No, I don't." He met her eyes. "But I'm asking you to stay. That's different." Emily looked at him for a long time, long enough that the last of the daylight shifted on the floor between them. "He's not going to let this go," she said. "I know. He's going to come up here, eventually." "Let him," Rowan said. "This is my mountain." Outside, the summer dark came down over the Bitterroot slopes like a slow tide, and somewhere far below in the valley, Red Ridge lit its lamps one by one. But up here in the cabin on the north slope, it was quiet. The kind of quiet that was not an absence of something, but a presence solid and patient, and belonging to a man who had learned to be exactly as unmovable as the rock he'd built his life upon. Emily Carter had arrived on a broken-down horse with nothing but bruises and a name she hadn't explained. She didn't know it yet, but she had arrived at the one place in Bitterroot County where Silas Granger's reach stopped. Not because of deeds or laws or the grace of any government, but because Rowan Hale had decided it did. And on this mountain, what Rowan Hale decided had a way of becoming permanent. The morning after Rowan came back from Red Ridge, Emily woke before dawn. She lay on the cot in the dark and listened to the silence, and told herself she was going to leave. She had the same argument with herself she'd been having for 4 days. Now she knew the shape of it by heart, knew every turn it took, knew exactly where it ended. She would leave. She had to leave. Staying here was pulling a man who owed her nothing into something that could get him killed. That was the truth, plain and without decoration, and she was not the kind of woman who dressed up the truth to make it easier to swallow. She sat up. Rowan was in his chair by the door. Asleep, she thought his head was down. His arms folded across his chest, the rifle leaning against the wall beside him. But before she'd taken 2 steps across the cabin floor, he said without lifting his head, "It's not dawn yet." She stopped. "I know." "Then go back to sleep." "I can't." He lifted his head and looked at her in the dark. His eyes had that quality she'd noticed from the first morning they adjusted fast like an animal's. He saw things in low light that other men missed. "You're thinking about leaving," he said. I am leaving, she said. I've decided. He was quiet for a moment. Then he stood up slow, with the careful movement of a man who'd slept in a chair too many nights, and walked to the stove. He stirred the coals and added a piece of wood without speaking. Rowan? Where are you going to go? He asked. Not challenging. Actual question. She opened her mouth and closed it. Because Calhoun has that warrant, he said. The moment you're on any road south of here, you're in his territory. You go east, you hit the Granger grazing land 40 miles out. West is the reservation line, and there's nothing there for you. He got the coffee going. North is mountains. I'll go north then. He turned and looked at her. To what? She didn't answer. Emily. He said her name the way he said most things, without extra weight on it, without performance. Just the word placed in the air between them, asking her to be honest. Sit down and have coffee, and think about this like a practical woman instead of a scared one. I am scared, she said sharply. I have every right to be scared. I should be scared, and so should you. I know you're scared. He pulled out the stool and set it by the table in invitation. That's different from making decisions because of it. She sat. Not because he'd told her to, she was very clear with herself about that, but because the logic of what he'd said was sitting on her chest, and she needed to be off her feet while she dealt with it. He poured 2 cups and sat across from her, and they were quiet for a while. Outside, the first birds were starting the early ones before the light that always sounded like they were surprised to still be alive. I can't be the reason something happens to you, she finally said. He wrapped both hands around his cup. Something's already going to happen. The question is whether it happens to us together or to you, alone on a road somewhere. He looked at her steadily. I know which one I'd bet on. She looked away. I've lived on this mountain 6 years, he said. Before that, I was 3 years in Colorado. Before that, I was somewhere I don't talk about. I've been alone a long time, and I know what alone looks like and what it costs. He paused. You're not a burden, Emily. You're a problem to be solved, and I'm pretty good at problems. She looked back at him. Something in her expression shifted, not softened exactly, but recalibrated. Why? She said. I keep asking myself why. You don't know me. You don't owe me a single thing. So why? He took a drink of coffee, set the cup down. Because of the handprints, he said. She went still. On your face. His voice was even. No anger in it, or at least no anger she could hear on the surface. 2 sets. A man's hands. 1 set here. He touched his own cheekbone without breaking eye contact, and 1 at the wrist. That's not a man who lost his temper. That's a man who thought he owned something and was taking it back. He looked at her for a long moment. I grew up watching a man like that. I know exactly what he believed about the world, and I know exactly what he deserved. The cabin was very quiet. I can't change what happened to you, Rowan said, but I can make sure he doesn't finish it. Emily picked up her cup. Her hands were steady, but he could see what it cost her to keep them that way. You're a strange man, Rowan Hale, she said. Probably, he agreed. Most men would want something in return. I know. And you don't. He was quiet for a moment. I want him to not come up this mountain thinking he runs it, he said. That's what I want. She almost smiled. It wasn't a full smile, more like the shadow of one, the shape of one pressed to the side of her mouth and held there carefully. But it was the first time he'd seen it, and it changed her whole face. All right, she said. I'll stay. For now. That's all I'm asking. Don't make me regret it. I'll do my best, he said, and got up to make breakfast. 3 days after that, the first rider came up the mountain. Rowan saw him from the lean-to, a single man on a gray horse coming up the main trail at a slow walk, not trying to hide. He had the particular casual confidence of someone who'd been told he was allowed to go wherever he wanted. Rowan recognized the horse before he recognized the man. It was one of Granger's, a big gray, that the hands used for courier runs because it had good endurance on the mountain trails, He leaned the fence post he'd been working with against the lean-to wall and walked to the cabin. "Stay inside," he told Emily through the door. "Don't come out, don't make noise." A pause. Then, "Who is it?" "Granger's man, one rider." He picked up his rifle from beside the door. "I'll handle it." "Rowan." Inside Emily. He heard her pull back from the door, and then he went out to the porch and waited. The rider pulled up at the edge of the clearing. Young early 20s with a hat he hadn't been wearing long enough to break in properly. He looked at the rifle in Rowan's hands and at the man holding it, and spent a moment recalculating whatever he'd been told to expect. "Morning," the rider said. "You're on my land," Rowan said. "Not hostile, just a statement. Mr. Granger sent me up to—" "This is my land," Rowan said again. "You didn't have an invitation." The rider shifted in the saddle. "I'm just carrying a message." "Then say it from there." The young man looked like he wanted to be somewhere else. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, looked at it, and cleared his throat. "Mr. Granger wants you to know he's looking for a woman who was employed at his ranch. Dark hair, young. He has reason to believe she may have come through this area. He's asking as a neighbor if you have any information." "No." The rider blinked. "No, you don't have information or—" "No," Rowan said. "That's the whole answer." A pause. The rider looked at the paper like it might have additional instructions for this situation. It apparently didn't. "Mr. Granger also wanted me to mention that he values cooperation from the people who live in this valley and on the surrounding slopes. He takes care of his neighbors. Those who—" "Son," Rowan's voice was patient in the way that a stone was patient. "You've delivered your message. I've given you my answer. Now turn that horse around." The rider folded the paper, looked at Rowan, looked at the rifle. "Yes, sir," he said with the deflated tone of a man who was going to have an uncomfortable conversation when he got back to where he came from. He turned the horse and went back down the trail. Rowan stood on the porch until the sound of hoofbeats faded into the mountain quiet. Then he went inside. Emily was at the window. She'd watched the whole thing from inside, pressed to the side of the frame where she couldn't be seen from the trail. "He'll tell Granger you didn't cooperate," she said. "Yes. That makes it worse." "Probably." Rowan set the rifle back beside the door. "But it tells us something." "What?" He sent one rider with a polite message. He went to the table and poured what was left of the morning's coffee. "That means he's not sure yet. He's fishing. He doesn't know you're here. He suspects it. There's a difference." Emily turned away from the window. How long before suspicion becomes certainty? When that rider tells him I answered too fast and too clean. He drank the cold coffee without a face. "So we don't have long." She sat down at the table. He could see her thinking, working through it the way a practical person worked through a problem, not spiraling, but calculating. "Is there anyone in that town who would stand up?" she asked. "If it came to it. Anyone with enough standing that Granger couldn't just—" "Cal Alderman," Rowan said. "Maybe. He's got the longest history in Red Ridge, and he owns his building free and clear. Granger never got hold of the deed. He's one of the few men in town who Silas can't threaten through the land." One man. One man is more than none. He set the cup down. "There's also Doc Heron. He's been here longer than Granger, and he's stubborn enough to irritate a preacher. And Granger needs him. There's no other doctor for 40 miles. So he's left him alone. Would they help?" "I don't know," Rowan said honestly. "I know they're not happy. Whether unhappy turns into action, that's a different question." Emily looked at her hands on the table. "I've been thinking," she said slowly. "Before I left the ranch, I saw something. I didn't know what it meant at the time, but now—" She stopped. Rowan waited. "There was a man who came to the ranch about 2 months before I left, not a cowhand. He wore a good suit, carried a briefcase. Granger took him into the office, and I wasn't supposed to be in the hall, but I was there anyway because the hall was the only way to the kitchen from the back storeroom." She met Rowan's eyes. I heard Granger telling this man that the land deed survey had been done, that the North Valley land was in his name now. The man in the suit asked if the previous owner had been informed, and Granger laughed. Rowan was very still. He laughed, Emily said again, and he said the previous owner wasn't going to be a problem much longer. Who owns the North Valley land? Rowan asked. I don't know his name, but I know it's not Granger, or it wasn't. It's older land, been in someone's family a long time. That's what the hands used to say. She paused. One of the hands, Terence, he was one of the decent ones. He mentioned once that the family up on the Northland was going to have trouble, that Granger had his eye on it. Rowan stood up from the table. He walked to the window and looked out at the slope, at the trail going down at the shape of the valley below, where the morning light was hitting the cattle lands and making them look golden and peaceful. The Whitmore family, he said. Emily looked at him. You know them. Tom Whitmore, his wife Clara. They've got 2 daughters and a piece of North Valley land that's been in Tom's family since before the war. He paused. I traded with Tom last autumn, elk for grain and seed. He seemed all right. Didn't say anything about trouble. Maybe he didn't know it was coming, Emily said. Or maybe it started after October. Rowan turned from the window. If Granger is moving on the Whitmore land on top of coming for you, that's not just a man protecting his interests. That's a man who's decided there's nobody left to stop him. The words sat in the room between them. He might be right, Emily said. He might be, Rowan agreed. But he hasn't met the right kind of opposition yet. She looked at him. What does that mean? He didn't answer directly. Instead he said, Can you ride? I got up this mountain on Maggie at night half unconscious. That's not the same as riding. Yes, I can ride. Tomorrow morning, he said. We're going to the Whitmore place. Mao. They rode out before the heat peaked, taking the high trail that cut along the ridge before dropping into the North Valley by the back way. Rowan had taken this route enough times to know every shift in it where the trail got loose near the second switchback, where the overhang gave you cover, if the weather turned, where you could stop and see 3 miles in every direction without being seen yourself. Emily kept up without complaint. She rode Maggie and he rode his roan, and for the first hour they didn't talk much the way people don't when the trail needs attention. But somewhere on the upper ridge, where the path widened and the valley opened below them like a map, she pulled alongside him. Tell me about the Whitmores, she said. Tom's about 50. Came west after the war, Virginia, I think, though he doesn't talk about it much. Built his house on the land his older brother homesteaded and left him when he died. Clara's a Texas woman. Tougher than Tom in the ways that matter. The daughters are 12 and 9, something like that. They're good people, as far as I can tell, Rowan said, and the land they're on is the best in the North Valley. River access, good soil, sheltered from the north wind, worth a considerable amount to a man who controls the cattle routes. Emily rode in silence for a moment. Then, if Granger takes their land on top of everything else, what happens to this valley? He owns it, Rowan said. All of it. Every route, every deed, every person who needs to use either. He kept his eyes on the trail ahead. A man who owns a valley owns the people in it, maybe not legally, but in every way that matters day to day. That's not a thing that can be allowed to happen. No, he said. It's not. They came down off the ridge around mid-morning, and Rowan knew something was wrong before they reached the Whitmore gate. It wasn't one thing. It was the accumulation of small details that hit him one after another, like notes in a cord, the gate hanging open, when Tom Whitmore kept it latched, always even in summer. The absence of the 2 dogs that always came running when hoofbeats reached the yard. The silence from the direction of the barn when there should have been at least one of the daughters doing morning chores. He held up a hand, and Emily stopped beside him. What is it? She said low. Something's not right. He studied the yard. The front door of the house was closed. A water bucket was lying on its side near the well, like it had been dropped and not picked up. Wait here. Not a chance, she said. He looked at her. She looked back. He made a decision and nudged his horse forward. They rode into the yard slowly. Rowan had his hand near the rifle, but not on it, a message that said, "Ready, but not starting anything." The front door opened before they reached the porch. Clara Whitmore came out with a shotgun. She was a small woman, but she handled the shotgun like she'd been born with it, and her eyes, dark brown, sharp as cut glass, went from Rowan to Emily and back again with the speed of someone who had learned in the last 12 hours to trust nothing. "Clara," Rowan said quietly, "it's Rowan Hale, from up North Slope. I know who you are." She didn't lower the shotgun. "Who's she?" "Friend of mine. She's in trouble. Different trouble than yours, but connected." He stopped the horse. "Where's Tom?" Something happened to Clara Whitmore's face. Not a collapse, she was not a woman who collapsed, but a tightening, a drawing in of everything that might be soft. "They took him," she said. The words hit like a flat stone. "Who took him?" "Calhoun and 2 men from Granger's outfit, yesterday morning." She finally lowered the shotgun, not put it down, just lowered it. "Calhoun said there was a warrant. Said Tom had filed a fraudulent claim on the Northland. Said he needed to come to town to straighten it out." Her voice was controlled in the way that required enormous effort to maintain. "The deed to that land is in my husband's family for 30 years. There is nothing fraudulent about it." "I know," Rowan said. "He's been in that jail since yesterday noon, and no one will tell me anything. I went to Cal Alderman because he's the only decent soul left in that town, and Cal told me to go home and lock my doors and wait." Her jaw was rigid. "I've been waiting. I'm done waiting." Rowan dismounted. He handed his reins to Emily without looking at her, and he walked up to the porch. "Can I come inside?" he asked. Clara Whitmore looked at him for a long moment. Then she stepped back and held the door open. They sat at the Whitmore kitchen table, Clara, Rowan, and Emily, while the 2 daughters stayed in the back room where Clara had sent them. The older one had Clara's same cut-glass eyes and kept appearing in the doorway to check, and every time Clara looked at her and shook her head once she disappeared again. Clara laid it out plain. 2 men from Granger's outfit had ridden onto the property 3 weeks ago with a surveyor. She and Tom had refused them access. The surveyor had done the survey anyway from the boundary line while the 2 riders watched to make sure neither Tom nor Clara interfered. The following week, Tom received a letter from a man in the county seat claiming the original homestead filing had an error in the boundary description, and that the north section, the river section, the valuable section, was in dispute. Tom had ridden to town to respond. The county clerk told him the paperwork was being reviewed and he would be contacted. 2 weeks of silence. Then Calhoun with a warrant. "He's going to come home," Clara said. She said it like someone reinforcing a wall that kept threatening to fall. "He's going to come home, and we are going to fight this through the proper channels, and we are going to win." "Yes," Rowan said. "I need someone to tell me how." "The county deed office keeps originals," Rowan said. "If Tom's family filed that homestead 30 years ago, there's a recorded copy that Granger can't touch. Whatever new survey or paperwork he's manufactured, it can't override a legitimate original recording without a court process. And a court process means a judge." He paused. "Granger owns the local judge, but he doesn't own the territorial court." Clara was still. "The territorial court." "Helena, it's a 2-day ride. Someone would have to go." "Yes." She looked at him. "Are you saying you'll go?" "I'm saying it needs to happen. I'm working out the how." He glanced at Emily. Something was moving behind Emily's eyes, thought calculation. The same quality of practical mind she'd shown from the first morning. "The man who came to the ranch," Emily said. "The one in the suit with the briefcase. If he was a lawyer or a land agent, there would be a record of him being there. A name. A record of what transaction he was brought in to execute." "You'd have to find that record," Clara said. "Or find him," Emily said. "A land agent working in this territory would be registered somewhere, and if what he helped Granger do was fraudulent, he's liable too, which means he might be willing to talk if the right kind of pressure found him." Clara looked at Emily like she was seeing her properly for the first time. "Who are you?" "Someone who was in the wrong place at the right time," Emily said, "and paid for it." The two women held each other's gaze. Something passed between them, an understanding that had nothing to do with Rowan about the specific cost of being a woman who sees too much in a county run by a man like Silas Granger. "I'll get you the name," Clara said. Tom wrote everything down. He kept records of every interaction, every letter, every visit, every name. He kept them because he said you never knew what you'd need later. She stood. He was right. She went to the back of the house. Rowan and Emily sat in the kitchen, and for a moment neither of them spoke. "She's going to hold," Emily said quietly. "Yes," Rowan said. "She's frightened, but she's not going to break." "I can see that." Emily looked at him. "People don't break as easily as men like Granger think they do," she said. "That's the thing he keeps miscalculating. He looks at a woman holding a shotgun and sees someone he can scare into compliance. He doesn't see someone who's been holding things together her whole life and knows exactly how much weight she can carry." Rowan looked at her. "Is that you or her?" Emily was quiet for a moment. "Both," she said. Clara came back with a folded journal, worn brown leather, thick with pages. She set it on the table and opened it to a marked entry. Tom Whitmore's handwriting was small and precise, the handwriting of a man who took documenting seriously. The name was there, clear and certain. Aldous Price. Land agent. Office in Helena. And beside it in Tom's careful hand, a note. Price stated, "NV boundary correction was per New County Ordinance, 1882. I asked to see the ordinance." He could not produce it. Rowan read it twice. "Because it doesn't exist," he said. "Granger invented it," Emily said. "Yes." He looked up at Clara. "May I take this?" "Take it," Clara said. "Take whatever you need. Just bring my husband home." They were halfway back up the ridge when Emily said, "You're going to Helena. Someone has to. You can't go and stay here at the same time." "No." She rode in silence for a moment. "Then I'm coming with you." "Emily, think about it practically," she said. And there was something new in her voice. A steadiness that hadn't been there a week ago, or if it had been, there had been buried under too much fear to hear. "You need someone who can identify Price. I saw his face. I heard his conversation with Granger. You need a witness, Rowan. And I'm it." He didn't answer immediately. The trail demanded attention for a stretch, a loose section where the horse needed to feel its way, and he let it have what it needed and thought while he rode. She was right. He knew she was right, and she knew he knew it, because when the trail leveled out and he looked at her, she wasn't arguing anymore. She was just watching him, waiting for him to catch up to the conclusion she'd already reached. "It puts you on the road," he said. "I know. Calhoun's territory. I know that too. If we're stopped, we don't get stopped." She said it simply. "We go the back way, the high trail. We stay off the main roads." He studied her face. The bruise had moved from purple to green-yellow, now healing, changing, but still visible enough to tell the story of what had been done to her. She held his gaze without flinching. "All right," he said. "All right. We go to Helena," he said. "Both of us. 2 days out, find Price, 2 days back. We leave Clara with a shotgun and the dogs. Where are the dogs, by the way?" "She locked them in the barn when Calhoun came. She was afraid they'd get shot." He nodded. "We leave at first light tomorrow." Emily turned her horse back toward the trail. He saw her shoulders settle, not the tension of before, but the different settling of someone who has made a decision and feels the solid ground of it under their feet. "Rowan," she said without looking back. "Yeah. Thank you for not telling me I couldn't." He looked at the back of her head, the dark hair loose again in the summer wind, the straight set of her back, the way she sat a horse like she'd been doing it since she was small and would be doing it long after most people had quit. "You'd have gone anyway," he said. She didn't deny it. They rode back up into the mountains in the long golden light of late afternoon, and below them in the valley that Silas Granger believed he owned, the town of Red Ridge went about the business of being afraid. But up on the slope in the last hours before tomorrow began something that was not fear, was moving something that had a name like intention, like direction, like the specific quiet that precedes a storm that has made up its mind. And Silas Granger, sitting in his house in the valley with a glass of bourbon and a settled sense of his own power, had no idea that the mountain had started paying attention. They left before the sun cleared the ridge. Rowan had the horses ready while the sky was still gray. Saddlebags packed tight with 2 days of food. Tom Whitmore's journal wrapped in oilcloth and tucked deep against his side. Emily came out of the cabin without being called dressed for riding. Her hair braided back and her jaw set with the particular expression he was starting to recognize, not bravado, not recklessness, but the face of someone who had made their decision the night before and slept on it and woke up still holding it. She checked Maggie's cinch without being told. He noticed that. "Clara knows to keep the gate latched," he said. "I told her last night when you were in the lean-to." Emily swung up into the saddle. "I also told her if Calhoun comes back before we return, she sends her oldest girl up the ridge to find the trapper's shelter. I left a note there this morning with the direction to follow." He looked at her. "You were splitting wood," she said simply. "I had time." He mounted without comment, but something in his chest shifted slightly, the way a load shifts when you redistribute the weight and realize it's easier than it was. He'd been carrying this alone for 6 years. He'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone think alongside him. They took the high trail north before cutting east. It added 2 hours to the ride, but kept them above the main valley roads where Calhoun's men ran their patrols. The first hour was silent, except for the horses and the early birds, and the distant sound of the creek running somewhere below. The mountain was still cool at that hour, the air carrying the last of the night's cold before the summer heat reasserted itself. Emily broke the silence somewhere past the first ridge. "Tell me about Helena," she said. "Territory capital, bigger than anything in this valley. Territorial court is their judge-clerk land registry." He guided his horse around a loose patch on the trail. "Aldous Price, if he operates as a land agent in this territory, will have a registered office address. Probably on Last Chance Gulch, that's the main street. Most of the professional men keep offices there. And if he doesn't want to talk, then we find what he filed. Land transactions are public record. If he executed a fraudulent survey or deed modification on Granger's behalf, there's paperwork. There's always paperwork. Men like Price protect themselves with paper. They put everything in writing because they think writing protects them." He paused. "It does until someone reads it." Emily nodded slowly. "And the territorial judge, can he override what Granger's local judge has done, if the evidence warrants it? The territorial court has jurisdiction over county courts on land matters. It was established specifically because county corruption was," he stopped, is a problem. "You sound like you know the law." "I know enough." She glanced at him sideways. The trail had widened slightly, and she pulled alongside him. "You keep saying things like that." "I know enough. I've seen this before." "Where did you come from, Rowan, before Colorado?" He rode in silence for a moment, the kind of silence that wasn't avoidance but preparation. "Missouri," he said. "I was a lawyer." Emily stared at him. "Junior partner in a land claims firm in Kansas City." He kept his eyes on the trail. "For 4 years, before I understood what kind of work I was actually doing." "What kind was it?" "The kind where wealthy men paid us to find technical errors in homestead filings so they could absorb the land." He said it flatly without self-pity or performance. "I was good at it. I found errors that weren't errors. I manufactured the argument that they were. I did it because I was young, and the money was real, and I told myself it was just law, just the way the system worked." He paused. "And then I did it to a family in Jefferson County who had 3 children and a working farm, and I watched them loaded into a wagon with everything they could carry in 2 hours, and I quit the next morning." The trail curved. He followed it without breaking his train of thought. "I gave back my share of the fee, My partner threatened to ruin my name in the profession. I let him because by then I didn't want the profession anymore. He looked at her briefly. I drifted west, Colorado for a while, then up here. I haven't practiced law in 8 years, but I still know how it works. And I know exactly what Granger is doing, and exactly what it takes to undo it. Emily was quiet for a long moment. You've been carrying that a long time. It's not heavy anymore, he said. It used to be. Now it's just information. It's why you helped me, she said, not accusing, understanding. It's not just the handprints. It's because you know what men like Granger do, and you know what it costs people, and you are done being on the wrong side of it. He didn't answer, which was itself an answer. She let it sit. They rode on. They were 4 hours out, dropping toward the lower trail that would connect to the Helena Road when Rowan held up his hand and they both stopped. 2 riders on the trail below, moving slowly. Not trail riding patrolling. The particular back and forth drift of men covering ground rather than going somewhere. Rowan backed his horse off the trail into the trees without a word, and Emily followed, reading his movement the way you read someone you've been watching carefully for days. Grangers, she whispered. One of them is wearing Calhoun's deputy badge, he murmured. The other I don't recognize. They were close enough to hear voices if the wind cooperated. It did partially fragments carried up the slope in pieces. Said the woman was seen near the north slope, Hale's place. Granger wants confirmation before. The wind shifted. The voices dropped back into murmurs. Emily's hand was tight on Maggie's neck, keeping her calm. The mare was good. She didn't make a sound. The 2 riders completed their slow arc across the trail below and moved on heading south back toward town. Rowan waited until the sound of them was gone. Then he waited another 2 minutes. Then he said quietly, "They know you're with me." They suspected it from the message the rider took back, Emily said. Her voice was steady. You said it yourself. You answered too fast and too clean. We can't take the connecting trail. They'll have someone watching the junction. Then we go higher. She looked up the slope without hesitation. Take the ridge all the way east until it drops into the Helena Valley on the far side. It's longer. Half a day longer. But we get there. He looked at her. She was already turning Maggie toward the upper slope, reading the terrain. You've ridden that ridge? He asked. No, but I can see where it goes. He almost smiled. He turned his horse and followed her up. The ridge route was hard riding, steep in places, loose in others, long stretches, where they had to dismount and lead the horses across ground that wasn't safe to ride. Emily didn't complain once. She slipped on a loose section of shale and caught herself on her hands, and when Rowan moved toward her, she was already back on her feet, checking Maggie before she checked her own palms. I'm fine, she said before he asked. Your hands. I said I'm fine. He backed off. She remounted without assistance, and they kept moving. They made camp that night on the east side of the ridge, where the slope gave them cover and a clear view of the road below. No fire not this close to the valley road, not with Granger's men running patrols. Cold food, cold water from a stream they'd crossed an hour back, and the shared silence of 2 people who were past the stage of needing to fill quiet with words. Emily sat with her back against a boulder and unwrapped the cornbread from the cloth he'd packed it in and ate without speaking. He watched her from across the small distance between them. You doing all right? He asked. Better than I expected. She looked at the bread in her hands. I keep waiting to be more frightened than I am. And I think I used up most of my fear in the first 3 days on your mountain. There's only so much of it available before it turns into something else. What does it turn into? She thought about it honestly. Anger, she said. And after anger, I don't know. Something quieter. Something that just wants to finish the thing. That's not a bad place to get to. Is that where you are? He considered. I've been there for a while, he said. Since Jefferson County, maybe. She nodded slowly. The stars were clear above the ridge, and they both looked at them for a moment. "I need to tell you something," Emily said. He waited. "Before I left the ranch, the night his men stopped me in the yard." She didn't look at him. "One of them said something. He said Granger wasn't worried about me going to the law because the law was his. But he said if I went to anyone else, anyone outside the county Granger would deal with me the way he'd dealt with the Harmon family." Rowan went still. "What's the Harmon family?" "I didn't know when he said it. I filed it away because I was too frightened to think straight." She looked at him now. "But on the ride today I kept thinking about it. The Harmon family. Has anyone in that valley disappeared? A family farm people, probably. In the last year or two." The silence that followed was the kind that had weight. "There was a family," Rowan said slowly. 2 years ago. They had a place on the south end of the valley. Small holding cattle and hay. They left suddenly. The story in town was they'd gone to Oregon family reasons." He paused. "I never knew them well. I heard about it from Cal last autumn. He mentioned it almost in passing." "Cal looked troubled when he mentioned it," Emily said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Rowan said. "They held the implication between them, and neither of them said what they were thinking directly. But it was there the possibility that the Harmon family had not gone to Oregon. That some problems in Silas Granger's county were solved, not through fraudulent paperwork, but through more permanent means." "If that's true," Emily said quietly, "then Tom Whitmore isn't just in jail for a land dispute." "No," Rowan said. "He isn't." She pulled her knees to her chest and wrapped her arms around them. Not crumbling restructuring, taking in the new size of the thing they were walking toward. "We find Price," she said. "We get the territorial court involved. We get Tom out before Granger decides a jailhouse is less permanent than he wants." "Yes." "How long do we have?" "I don't know. But I'd rather move like we're running out of time and be wrong than move slowly and be right." "Then we leave at first light," she said. "That was already this plan." "Good." She lay down on her bedroll and pulled her coat over herself and was quiet. Then just before sleep, "Rowan." "Yeah." "The family in Jefferson County. The ones you watched get loaded into the wagon." He waited. "Did you ever find out what happened to them?" A long pause. "They settled in Illinois. The father wrote to the court 3 years later trying to recover the land. He lost." Another pause. "I know because I checked. I've checked every year since." Emily didn't say anything. She didn't need to. He sat with his rifle and watched the valley road below in the dark, and the mountain wind moved over the ridge, and somewhere in the distance, the first suggestion of tomorrow was already forming in the east. Helena hit them like a physical force after 5 days of mountain silence. The noise of its wagons voices the hammer ring of the blacksmith on Last Chance Gulch. The sheer density of people moving in directions that had nothing to do with each other came at them the moment they cleared the last slope and moved into the town's edge. Emily's shoulders went up instinctively. Rowan watched her absorb it and adjust. "Stay close," he said. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. They found a livery for the horses and a room at a boarding house on the south end of the gulch. 1 room, 2 beds, no discussion about it. The woman who ran the boarding house looked at Emily's still-fading bruise and at Rowan, and then looked away with the deliberate neutrality of a woman who had seen many things and kept them to herself. "Meals at 6 and noon," she said. "Water's in the hall." "Thank you, ma'am," Rowan said. They were back on the street within the hour, moving toward the land registry office at the north end of the gulch. The clerk at the registry was a thin young man with ink-stained fingers and the slightly martyred air of someone who dealt with important paperwork and was never sufficiently appreciated for it. He looked at Rowan's request examination of land transaction records for the Bitterroot County North Valley region past 3 years with the expression of a man trying to decide how much trouble this was. "That's a significant volume of records," he said. "I understand," Rowan said. "Are they available for public examination?" "They are public record, yes, but then I'd like to examine them." The clerk looked at Emily. She met his gaze pleasantly. He looked back at Rowan. It may take some time to locate and pull the relevant files. We'll wait, Rowan said. They waited for 40 minutes. During that time, Rowan studied the board of registered professional agents posted near the registry entrance. Aldous Price was listed Land Agent Licensed 1879 Office at 14 Last Chance Gulch. He noted the address without moving his eyes to it more than once. When the clerk returned with 3 bound folders of records, Rowan sat at the examination table and opened the first one. Emily sat beside him, and they went through it together, and it took less than 20 minutes to find the first problem. The boundary correction filing on the Whitmore North section was dated March 1883. It cited County Ordinance 1882-7 as its authority. The filing was executed by Aldous Price Land Agent on behalf of the Bitterroot Valley Land and Cattle Company, which was Silas Granger's legal entity, though the name was designed to make that non-obvious. Rowan turned to the index of county ordinances. He searched for 1882-7. It did not exist. He searched the surrounding ordinances. 1882 to 1886 was a regulation about cattle dipping. 1882 to 1888 was about road maintenance contributions. There was no 1882 to 1887. The ordinance Price had cited as legal authority for the boundary correction had never been enacted. Emily had been reading over his shoulder. He made it up, she said. He cited a non-existent ordinance in a territorial filing, Rowan said. That's not just fraud. That's filing a false instrument with the territorial government. He looked at her. That's a criminal charge, not a civil one. She understood the difference immediately. Which means Granger can't make it go away with a local judge. No, Rowan said. He cannot. He requested copies from the clerk who produced them, with the efficiency of a man who had decided these strangers were going to be here all day and should be processed as quickly as possible. Rowan paid for the copies and thanked him, and they walked out onto Last Chance Gulch into the full afternoon sun. Price's office, Emily said. Yes. He's going to be defensive, she said as they walked. He'll know the filing is fraudulent. The moment he sees us, he'll know why we're there. He will, Rowan agreed, so we don't give him time to build the wall. What does that mean? It means we walk in like we already have everything we need, and we're giving him one chance to be useful rather than prosecuted. He glanced at her. Can you do that? Walk in like you're not afraid of him? She looked at him directly. I walked onto your porch in the middle of the night, half dead, she said. I can walk into a land agent's office. Number 14 was a narrow building with Price's name on a board beside the door. Inside a desk, a filing cabinet, a man in a good suit who looked up when the door opened and went through 3 distinct expressions in about 2 seconds. Recognition. Emily's face triggering something. Confusion. Who was the man with her? And then the beginning of the calculation. Rowan didn't let it complete. Mr. Price, he said, closing the door behind him. My name is Rowan Hale. I'm a former member of the Kansas City Bar. This is Emily Carter, who has provided sworn testimony regarding a conversation she witnessed between yourself and Silas Granger at the Granger Ranch in April of this year. He set the folder of copies on Price's desk. I've pulled the Whitmore boundary correction filing from the Territorial Registry. You cited County Ordinance 1882-7. That ordinance doesn't exist. I have the index here. Price looked at the papers, looked at Rowan, looked at Emily. I don't know what you think, Mr. Price. Rowan's voice was quiet and extremely clear. This conversation can go one of 2 ways. The first way, you tell me exactly what Granger paid you to file and how, and I take that information to the territorial court, and your cooperation becomes a material factor in what happens to you. The second way, I take these copies to the territorial prosecutor and let him determine whether your license should be revoked while the criminal fraud investigation proceeds. He paused. Which way would you like this to go? Price's face had gone through several more phases and had arrived at something close to pale. He was a man who did business in the gray areas of the law because he'd calculated that gray areas were profitable and low risk. He had not calculated for someone who knew exactly which gray areas weren't actually gray. "I was told it was a legitimate correction," Price said. His voice had lost its office hours steadiness. "Granger said the original filing had an error. He said the ordinance had been passed and wasn't yet in the index. And you didn't verify." A pause. "I should have verified." "Yes," Rowan said. "You should have. If I—" Price stopped, started again. "If I provided a written account of the transaction as Granger presented it to me and stated clearly that I was told the ordinance existed and acted in reliance on that representation, would that constitute cooperation?" "It would be a start," Rowan said. Price opened his desk drawer. His hand was not steady. He pulled out a clean sheet of paper and uncapped his pen. Emily stood beside the filing cabinet and watched him write, and she felt something happening in her chest that she didn't have a clean word for. It wasn't triumph. It was too quiet for triumph. It was more like the sensation of a weight that had been pressing on a specific spot, suddenly lifting, and the skin underneath being tender but intact. Price wrote for 12 minutes. When he was done, he signed the bottom with his full name and the date and pushed it across the desk. Rowan read it. He read it twice slowly. Then he folded it and placed it in the inner pocket of his jacket. "Is there anything else you can tell me about Granger's operations in the North Valley?" Rowan asked. Price was quiet for a moment. He looked like a man weighing how much lighter he wanted to be against how much lighter he could safely afford to become. "There's another filing," he said finally. "From last year, a different family. I wasn't directly involved, but I know which agent was." Rowan looked at him. "The Harmon property," Price said. "On the south end of the valley." The air in the small office went tight. "What happened to the Harmon family, Mr. Price?" Emily said. Her voice was careful in the way a hand is careful approaching something that might be hot. Price looked at the desk. "I don't know precisely," he said. "I know they didn't go to Oregon." The silence that followed was the kind that doesn't get filled. Rowan looked at Emily. She looked at him. And between them, without a word, the shape of what they were actually up against became fully clear. For the first time, not a corrupt land baron running the usual graft, but a man who had already crossed a line from which there was no legal coming back. Which meant he would cross it again, easily, without hesitation. And Tom Whitmore was in his jail. Rowan picked up the folder from Price's desk. "Thank you for your time," he said, and his voice was so measured you could have used it for a level. "Don't leave Helena. The territorial prosecutor will want to speak with you." "Am I?" Price started. "Stay in Helena." "Mr. Price," Rowan said. He opened the door. Emily walked out ahead of him. He paused in the doorframe. "And lock your office door tonight." He closed it behind him. They stood on the gulch for a moment. The afternoon crowd moved around them, indifferent, going about ordinary business in a town that did not know what was happening 40 miles south in the valley below the mountains. "We need the territorial court today," Emily said. "The clerk's office closes at 5. He was already moving. "It's 3:30. She was beside him, stride for stride. "The Harmon family." "I know. Tom Whitmore doesn't have—" "I know," he said. "I know Emily. We move." The territorial court clerk was a heavy-set woman named Mrs. Fogarty, who had been handling the administrative machinery of territorial justice for 11 years and had developed the particular brisk competence of someone who had seen everything once and some things too many times. Rowan put the copies on her desk, put Price's statement beside them, and explained the situation in plain legal language that she could follow without simplification. She read the filing, read the statement, looked at the non-existent ordinance index entry. Then she looked at Rowan over her spectacles. "This is a fraudulent instrument filed with the territorial registry," she said. "Yes. And the family whose land is being taken under this fraudulent authority has a member currently in county detention. Tom Whitmore, held on a warrant that was almost certainly manufactured by the same party that filed this instrument." She looked at Emily. "You're a witness to the transaction." I heard Aldous Price and Silas Granger discuss the boundary correction at the Granger Ranch, Emily said clearly. I heard Granger instruct Price to execute the filing. I am prepared to provide sworn testimony. Mrs. Fogarty set the papers down. She opened a drawer and pulled out a form. A writ of inquiry can be issued to compel the county to present basis for the detention, she said, writing as she spoke. It won't release him immediately, but it requires Calhoun to justify the warrant before a territorial judge within 72 hours. That forces the hand Granger has to produce a legitimate legal basis or let Tom Whitmore walk. Can you issue it today? Rowan asked. She glanced at the clock on the wall. I can have a judge sign it within the hour. She looked up. You'll need to deliver it. We'll ride tonight, Emily said. She didn't look at Rowan for permission. She said it, and it was said. Mrs. Fogarty looked at her for a moment. Then she went back to writing. There's a territorial marshal stationed in Helena. Given the nature of this, she gestured at the papers. Given what this suggests beyond a land dispute, I would strongly recommend requesting an escort. We'll take that recommendation, Rowan said. The hour it took was the longest hour Rowan remembered in some time. He and Emily sat in the corridor outside the judge's chamber and didn't talk much. At one point, she put her hand flat on the bench between them, not reaching for his, just placing it there, and he looked at it for a moment and then put his own hand nearby, close enough that their knuckles touched, and they sat like that while the judge read the papers and the court machinery turned. When Mrs. Fogarty came back out with the signed writ and the confirmation that a territorial marshal named Garrett would ride with them at first light, Emily exhaled once long and slow and all the way out, and he heard in it everything she hadn't said since the moment Clara Whitmore had told them Tom was in that jail. First light, he said. First light, she agreed. She took the writ and held it in both hands carefully like something alive. And he watched her do it and thought about Jefferson County and the family in the wagon and the 8 years between then and now. And he thought that this was the thing he'd owed not to her, specifically not to the Whitmores specifically, but to something larger and older than any one case. Something he'd been working toward without a map, and had just now in a territorial court corridor, with dust on his boots, and a woman holding a legal writ like it was oxygen finally found. Outside, the day was tipping toward evening. Helena hummed and moved around them. And 40 miles south in the quiet that Silas Granger mistook for permanence, the clock was running. Marshal Garrett was a lean man in his late 40s, with a quiet authority that reminded Rowan of certain kinds of weather, the kind that didn't announce itself, but arrived with total conviction. He had a deputy named Sosa Young and watchful who said almost nothing and missed almost nothing, which Rowan respected immediately. They rode out of Helena at first light, 4 horses on the eastern road, the writ folded in Rowan's inside jacket pocket, alongside Price's signed statement and the registry copies. The territorial judge had signed everything without ceremony, a man who had been doing this long enough to know fraudulent instruments on sight, and who had looked at the non-existent ordnance citation with the flat expression of someone who was offended professionally rather than personally. Garrett had read the papers the night before and asked 2 questions. The first was whether Rowan believed Tom Whitmore was in physical danger. The second was whether there was any evidence beyond land fraud. Rowan had told him about the Harmon family. Garrett had asked no further questions. He'd just said, "First light," and gone to prepare his horse. Now they rode in the early cool, and Emily kept pace without difficulty, and the miles came off steadily beneath them. She had slept, Rowan knew, because he'd heard her breathing even out through the wall between their rooms sometime after midnight, and he'd been relieved by it, the way you're relieved when someone who's been running hard finally gets to rest. She'd needed it. They both had. But she'd been up before him, standing in the boarding house corridor with her boots already on, when he came out of his room. "Ready," he'd said. "Have been," she'd said. Garrett rode beside Rowan now, while Emily and Sosa held the pace behind them. "Tell me about Calhoun," Garrett said. "County sheriff. Been in the position 4 years. He was a legitimate lawman before Granger. I've been told by people who knew him then that he was decent enough. What happened between then and now I can only guess at." Compromised or converted? Compromised first, Rowan said. Converted probably came after. When a man has done enough wrong things on someone else's behalf, he starts to need that person to stay powerful. Because if they fall, the accounting comes for him too. Garrett nodded. He understood that calculation. The 2 deputies he uses for Granger's work, I don't know them well. But the riders I met in town weren't wearing badges. Granger runs his own enforcement separate from the official structure. Keeps his hands cleaner. Tries to. It doesn't actually work that way, but it's the kind of legal distance that plays well if things stay local. Rowan looked at the trail ahead. They won't stay local anymore. No, Garrett said. They won't. They pushed hard and covered the distance in one long ride, stopping once at a creek to water the horses and eat quickly dried meat cornbread, nothing that required time. Emily ate standing, watching the road behind them. Rowan noticed and said nothing. She was doing what made sense. He was doing the same. They came into the Bitterroot Valley from the east as the afternoon heat was peaking. Rowan felt the shift immediately, the weight of the valley, the particular quality of its silence. He'd grown up in different country, but he'd lived here long enough to know when something was wrong with the atmosphere of a place, the way an animal knows before the storm is visible. Something's happened, he said. Garrett looked at him. You sure? No, Rowan said. But I'm not wrong either. They pushed the horses harder. They met Clara Whitmore on the road a mile outside of Red Ridge. She was riding her husband's big bay horse with the shotgun across her lap, and her oldest daughter up behind her, and when she saw Rowan she hauled up and the relief and fear on her face arrived in the same instant, fighting each other for space. Clara, Rowan pulled alongside her. What happened? They moved him, she said. Last night. Calhoun moved Tom out of the Red Ridge jail and I don't know where. The words landed like a fist. Moved him where? Garrett asked. He'd positioned his horse forward automatically, the marshal's instinct to be where information was coming from. Clara looked at the badge on Garrett's chest, and something in her face changed, not relaxed exactly, but recalibrated. Official help was not something she'd expected. I don't know, she said. Cal Alderman sent his boy up to the house at dawn to tell me. He said Calhoun came in around midnight with 2 of Granger's men, and they took Tom out the back and put him on a horse and rode south. South is Granger's main ranch, Rowan said. I know that, Clara said. Her voice was controlled, but her hands were tight on the reins. I know exactly what south means. Garrett looked at Rowan. The same thought was in both of their minds, and neither of them said it directly, because Clara Whitmore was right there, and her daughter was right there. And some thoughts didn't need to be spoken aloud to be understood. We go to the ranch, Rowan said. That's private property, Garrett said. I need cause. You have a writ requiring Calhoun to present basis for Tom Whitmore's detention before a territorial judge within 72 hours, Rowan said. Tom Whitmore has been moved from the official county detention facility to an unknown location. That's obstruction of a territorial writ. You have cause. Garrett held his gaze for 2 seconds. Yes, he said. I do. He looked at Clara. Ma'am, I need you to take your daughter and go to town. Go to Cal Alderman's store and stay there. Don't leave until we come back. Clara looked like she wanted to argue. She looked at her daughter's face behind her, the 12-year-old with the cut glass eyes watching everything. And she made the decision that a mother makes. You bring him back, she said to Rowan. Yes, ma'am, he said. She turned the horse toward town. Rowan watched her go for 1 second and then turned back to the trail south. Emily, he said. I heard, she said. Let's go. They were half a mile from the Granger ranch gate when they found Cal Alderman. He was standing in the middle of the road with his hands up, not surrendering but showing he was unarmed, the deliberate gesture of a man who needed to be heard before anyone made a fast decision. Rowan pulled up. Cal. I've been waiting, Cal said. Figured you'd come this way. He looked at Garrett and Sosa and the badge on Garrett's chest. Good. You need to know something before you ride in there. Quickly, Garrett said. Tom's in the ranch house. He's alive. I have that from someone I trust who was near the property at dawn. Cal was speaking fast and clean. But Granger has 8 men on the property and he knows you went to Helena. He knew by yesterday noon. How? Emily asked. He has someone in Helena, Cal said. He has someone everywhere. He's been building this for 3 years, you understand. This isn't improvised. He's been building toward owning this entire valley every piece, and he has people in place at every angle. Cal stopped. Including the county telegraph office, which is how he knew about the writ within an hour of it being issued. The implication hit all of them simultaneously. He's had a full night to prepare, Garrett said. Yes, 8 men on the property. At least, maybe more came in overnight? Garrett looked at Sosa. Sosa was already doing the arithmetic of 2 territorial lawmen against 8 or more armed men on private property, and the arithmetic was not comfortable. He didn't say so. He just looked back at Garrett with the expression of a man awaiting orders. I have legal authority to enter this property, Garrett said, but authority and capacity aren't the same thing. He looked at Rowan. What do you know about the layout of that ranch? I've been there twice, Rowan said. The main house is set back from the gate, long drive, open ground on both sides. The bunkhouses are west of the house. Barn is east. If they're watching the road, they'll see us coming from half a mile out. Which is exactly what Granger wants, Emily said. Everyone looked at her. He wants you to ride up that gate openly. He wants to make it a confrontation on his terms, on his ground with his men surrounding you. She looked at Garrett. He's going to tell you the writ isn't valid. He's going to tell you you're in his county, and you have no authority here. And while you're arguing it on his driveway, something happens to Tom in that house. Silence. She's right, Cal said. She is, Rowan agreed. Garrett rubbed the side of his jaw. I'm a territorial marshal. My authority supersedes the county line, and he knows it. He knows it, Rowan said. He's planning to make it irrelevant. How? Rowan looked at him steadily. Because if Tom Whitmore is dead by the time we get to that house, the writ becomes a different kind of matter entirely. One that Granger's lawyers and Helena will turn into a 2-year court process, while he consolidates every piece of land in this valley and makes himself so embedded that no court's remedy is practical anymore. He paused. He's not afraid of the law, Garrett. He's been managing the law for 3 years. What he hasn't planned for is speed. Meaning we don't go up the main drive. Cal Alderman knew the ranch property because he'd been delivering goods to it for 10 years, and he knew something that Granger's men probably didn't think about. The eastern fence line ran close to the dry creek bed that cut along the back of the property, and there was a section near the old hay barn where the fence had been poorly set and had leaned for 2 years without being repaired. Rowan and Emily went through the fence while Garrett and Sosa rode up the main drive. The plan was precise and timed. Garrett would present himself at the gate badge, visible writ in hand, and request lawful entry. Every second Granger's men spent managing Garrett at the gate was a second that Rowan was moving through the back of the property. The confrontation at the gate was real. Garrett was genuinely there, genuinely presenting the writ, genuinely prepared to press his authority. But it was also a direction, and direction was everything. Rowan moved fast and low through the property. Emily kept pace 2 steps behind him. "The house?" he said, barely above a breath. "I know," she said. They came around the back of the hay barn, and Rowan stopped and listened. From the front of the property, he could hear voices. Garrett's controlled official tone, and a rougher voice that would be Calhoun, and the particular charged silence of men behind it who were holding positions and waiting to see what happened. Back here 2 men, one near the corner of the barn, one by the back door of the house, both watching the direction of the gate confrontation, neither watching the creek line. Rowan assessed this in about 4 seconds. "The one by the door," he said to Emily. "When he moves toward the barn corner to see what's happening at the front, that's our window. 10 seconds maybe." "What makes him move?" Rowan picked up a stone from the ground near his boot and weighed it in his hand. He threw it high and long over both men, so it landed on the far side of the barn roof and clattered down the other side. The man by the barn corner turned toward the sound. The man by the back door turned toward the barn corner. 10 seconds. Rowan and Emily crossed the open ground to the back door in 8. The door was unlocked. Granger hadn't anticipated needing to lock it from the inside. Rowan pushed through Emily right behind him, and they were in the back hall of the ranch house. He stopped and listened. Voices from the front of the housemen positioned near the windows watching the gate. To his right, a closed door at the end of the hall. He moved to it, knocked twice low and quiet. A pause. Then from inside a voice that was raw and careful, and trying not to be loud. "Who's there?" "Tom Whitmore," Rowan said. Another pause. "Who's asking?" "Name's Hale. I'm from the North Slope. Your wife sent me." The silence on the other side of that door was one of the more complex things Rowan had heard in some time. He could hear a man managing an enormous amount of emotion, fear, hope, the desperate calculation of whether this was real or a new cruelty in a few seconds of quiet. Then, "Is she all right, Clara? Is she—" "She's fine," Rowan said. "Your daughters are fine. They're with Cal Alderman." He tried the handle. Locked from outside key lock, not a bolt. He looked at the keyhole, looked at Emily. She was already reaching into her braid, pulling out the pin that held it. She handed it to him without a word. It took 40 seconds. He'd picked simpler locks with less in harder circumstances. The door opened. Tom Whitmore was sitting on the floor with his back against the far wall and his wrists bound in front of him with rope. He was a thick, square-shouldered man who looked like he'd been strong most of his life and was running on a reserve of that strength now. His face had 3 days of beard and 1 day of bruising, one eye swollen at the outer corner, a cut along his jaw. He looked at Rowan and at Emily with the focused attention of a man who needed to very quickly decide whether to trust what he was seeing. He decided. "Cut this," he said, holding up his wrists. Rowan pulled his knife and cut the rope. Tom stood immediately, not slowly, not carefully, but in one pushing motion, like a man rejecting the position he'd been forced into. He wobbled slightly and caught himself on the wall and stood straight. "How many out front?" he asked. "Garrett's handling the front. Territorial Marshal, 2 deputies." Rowan looked at the window. "We need to move now before someone comes to check on you." "Granger's in the front room," Tom said. "He's been there all morning. He came in at dawn and told me—" He stopped, jaw tight. "He told me the land was already his, and this was a courtesy, that I should sign over the deed and my family would be allowed to leave the county without trouble." "And the Harmon family," Rowan said. Tom's face went through something dark and certain. He didn't say it directly. He didn't have to. "He won't get the deed," Emily said. Tom looked at her, his first real look taking in the face he didn't know. "We have a territorial court writ. We have a statement from Aldous Price. We have proof the ordinance he used to file the boundary correction doesn't exist." She paused. "He has nothing. He built everything on paper that doesn't hold, and he's about to find that out." Tom Whitmore looked at this woman he'd never met, and something moved across his face. Not just relief, but a kind of profound recognition of what it had cost her to be standing in this room right now. "Thank you," he said. It was plain and direct, and came from the part of a man that doesn't perform. "Thank Clara," Emily said. "She never stopped fighting." Tom's throat moved. He looked at the window and gathered himself. "Let's go," Rowan said. "Why?" They came around the front of the house at the moment that Silas Granger walked out his own front door. He was not what Rowan had imagined. Not large, medium height, well-dressed even at midday on a working ranch with silver hair, and the kind of composed, deliberate manner that came from years of being the most powerful person in every room he entered. He looked at Garrett first, then at the writ in Garrett's hand, then at Calhoun, standing 3 feet away with the compressed expression of a man holding several conflicting loyalties simultaneously. And then Granger saw Tom Whitmore walking out from around the side of his own house, and the composition cracked. Not shattered. Cracked. A fault line running through the surface of the control. What? He looked at Calhoun. Why is he out of that room? Calhoun's face had gone the color of old ash. He looked at Garrett. He looked at the badge. He looked at the writ that he had not been able to see clearly until this moment, and could now read well enough to understand its implications. Silas, Calhoun said, and his voice for the first time carried something other than complicity. It carried the sound of a man looking at the edge of something he did not want to go over. Don't, Granger said to him. I have a territorial writ, Garrett said, stepping forward, his voice clear and carrying to every man on that property. Issued by the Territorial Court at Helena, requiring presentation of lawful basis for the detention of Thomas Whitmore. That man, he indicated Tom, has been removed from official county detention to a private property, which constitutes obstruction of a territorial writ. I am placing this property under territorial jurisdiction, pending investigation. Granger looked at Garrett. The look was the look of a man who had operated for 3 years on the assumption that the system was his to direct, confronting the reality that the system had a level he hadn't managed to reach. You have no evidence of any wrongdoing, Granger said. His voice was calm. We have a signed statement from Aldous Price describing in detail the land transaction he executed on your behalf, Rowan said, stepping forward beside Garrett. We have territorial registry records showing the ordinance cited in that transaction does not exist. We have a witness who overheard you direct Price to execute the filing. He paused. And we have the writ, which means that whatever you intended to happen to Tom Whitmore before we got here didn't happen. Which means you're not in the worst legal position possible. Yet. Granger looked at him for a long time. Then he looked at Emily. She stood her ground. She didn't fold her arms, and she didn't step back, and she didn't look away. She stood exactly where she was and held his gaze with the particular quality of someone who has already survived the thing you used to threaten them with. You, Granger said. Quiet. Personal. Like there was no one else on the property. Me, Emily said. You have no idea what you've... I know exactly what I've done, she said. The same thing you spent 3 weeks trying to make sure I couldn't do. Her voice was steady and clear and carried. I told the truth. To the right people. With evidence. She looked at him for one more moment. That's all it took. One of Granger's men shifted his weight. Rowan clocked at the man's hand moving toward the sidearm. Don't, Garrett said without looking at the man. His own hand was already positioned. Sosa's was too, though Sosa still hadn't moved from his spot and still hadn't said a word. The moment stretched. These were the seconds that decided things not with action, but with assessment. Granger's men were looking at each other, and at the badges, and at Tom Whitmore standing free, and at the clear public visible presence of territorial authority, and they were calculating their own exposure. The man who'd shifted his weight moved his hand away from his sidearm. Granger watched this. He stood very still, and he watched his men stand down in increments, and he understood in the way that intelligent men understand when a structure has failed that what had been built here was finished. He looked at Calhoun. Calhoun was already looking at the ground. I'll need to speak with my attorney, Granger said to Garrett. His voice was controlled and final. That's your right, Garrett said. Sosa, take Calhoun. He looked at 2 of Granger's men who were wearing what appeared to be unofficial deputy arrangements. You 2 sidearms on the ground. Now. It took another 20 minutes to work through the property. Garrett moved through it with the efficiency of a man who'd done this before, establishing order in layers. The armed men first, the structure of authority. Second, the documentation. Third, Rowan stood to the side during most of it and let Garrett do his job because that was what the moment required. He watched Emily cross to Tom Whitmore and speak to him quietly, and saw Tom's hands shake once before he controlled them, the body releasing what the will had been holding back for 3 days. Cal Alderman arrived midway through. He'd heard the horses from the road and come down on foot, and he came through the gate with his hat in his hands and looked at the scene in front of him and then looked at Rowan. You actually did it, Cal said. Garrett did it, Rowan said. He had the authority. Somebody had to go get the authority. Rowan didn't answer that. Cal watched Granger being escorted toward Garrett by Sosa Granger's hands, bound in front of him with the same kind of rope that had been on Tom Whitmore's wrists that morning. There was a specific justice in that detail that didn't require comment. "What happens now?" Cal asked. "To the town, to the land. All the people who've been—" "The fraudulent filings get reversed," Rowan said. "The territorial court handles the land cases. Price testifies, which gives them everything they need for the criminal fraud charges. Calhoun cooperates or he doesn't, and either way the county gets a new sheriff." He looked at the main house. "It takes time. Nothing about this is fast, but the structure Granger built depended on staying invisible, and it isn't invisible anymore. Some people in that town did things," Cal said, "not because they wanted to, because they were afraid. The territorial prosecutor will sort that. Most of them aren't the target and they know it." Rowan looked at him. "You didn't do anything wrong, Cal." "I didn't do anything right either, not for a long time." "You sent your boy to Clara Whitmore at dawn," Rowan said. "That was right." Cal was quiet for a moment. He put his hat back on his head. "That lawyer you mentioned, Price, he's going to say he was deceived." "He was deceived," Rowan said. "Partially. He also didn't ask questions he should have asked. The law will determine where that line falls." He looked at Cal steadily. "That's what the law is supposed to do, when it works." "You sound like you believe that." "Most days," Rowan said. "More today than yesterday." By the time the sun was moving toward the western ridge, Garrett had established enough order that the immediate crisis had a shape contained, if not resolved. Tom Whitmore was free and had been examined by the only man in the area who had any medical knowledge, which was Cal, who determined that the beating he'd taken was thorough but not permanently damaging. 3 of Granger's men had cooperated immediately and were being held separately from the ones who hadn't. Calhoun had not yet spoken, but had the look of a man building toward cooperation, the way a dam builds toward giving way, inevitable, just a matter of when the pressure exceeded the structure. Garrett found Rowan at the edge of the property as the afternoon shifted. "You're not a practicing attorney," he said. "No. But you know the law." "I know it well enough to use it." Garrett studied him. "The territorial prosecutor is going to want statements from everyone involved. That includes you, and her." He nodded toward Emily, who was standing with Tom and speaking quietly. "She's going to have to testify formally about what she witnessed. It puts her name in the record." "I know," Rowan said. "She knows." "And about what was done to her? At the ranch?" "That too." Garrett was quiet for a moment. "She's a remarkable woman." "Yes," Rowan said. There was nothing more he added to that, and Garrett, who was a perceptive man, didn't push it. "Sosa and I will stay through the night," Garrett said. "I'll send to Helena for additional support should arrive in 2 days. Until then, I need Granger secured and the property documented." "You've got it handled." "I do." Garrett looked at him. "You could stay." "I'll be available when the prosecutor needs me." Rowan straightened. "Tonight, I need to get Emily off Granger's property." Garrett nodded. He understood the shape of that. "She's not safe in Red Ridge while Granger still has men who haven't been accounted for." "No, and she knows it." "Take her back up the mountain." Rowan looked at the mountain. It was clear from here, the north slope, the high trail, the place where the air was clean, and the only law was weather. "That was already the plan," he said. He walked toward Emily. She saw him coming and said something to Tom, and Tom looked at Rowan with a direct, uncomplicated gratitude that men like Tom Whitmore don't perform and don't diminish by putting too many words around. He put out his hand. Rowan shook it. "I'll be at the prosecutor's office when he needs me," Tom said. "So will we," Rowan said. He looked at Emily. "Ready." She had dust on her boots, and her braid had come half undone in the riding, and the long afternoon, and the bruise on her face, had moved to that final stage of healing, where the yellow-green of it looked like the skin was deciding to be itself again. She looked at him, with the particular expression he'd been watching develop across 12 days, from the guarded, exhausted arrival on a half-dead horse, through the careful calculation of whether to trust through the moment on the corridor bench in the territorial court, where their knuckles had touched, and neither of them had moved away. And now, here on the other side of what they'd ridden toward. "Ready," she said. They got their horses and rode out of the Granger property through the front gate, which was open in both directions now, and would stay that way for the foreseeable future. Behind them, Redridge was beginning to understand that something had changed. People were coming out of doorways. Cal Alderman was back in the street. The particular dangerous silence that Silas Granger had manufactured over 3 years was cracking open from the inside the way a frozen river cracks in the first real warmth of spring, not all at once, but irreversibly. Rowan and Emily rode north. The mountain was waiting, and for the first time in 6 years, Rowan Hale was riding toward it without riding away from something else. They rode north without speaking for the first mile, and the silence between them was not the silence of people who had nothing to say, but the silence of people who had said enough for one day and needed to let it settle. The valley fell away behind them. The mountain came up to meet them the way it always did, not dramatically, not with announcement, just the gradual shift of air and angle and the particular quality of quiet that existed only at elevation. Rowan felt it the moment they cleared the lower trail and hit the first switchback. The tension in his shoulders dropped half an inch. He didn't choose it. It just happened. Emily noticed. "You're different up here," she said. "I know, like something fits differently." He considered that. 6 years, he said. "A place gets into you." She looked at the slope ahead. "I used to think people who lived alone by choice were either broken or hiding." She paused. "I was wrong about that." "What changed your mind?" "Watching someone who lives alone by choice function better under pressure than anyone I've ever met." She looked at him sideways. "You weren't hiding, Rowan. You were just waiting, without knowing you were waiting." He didn't answer that because he didn't know yet if she was right, and he wasn't going to claim certainty he didn't have. But the words stayed with him the rest of the climb, fitting themselves against things he'd thought about in the long winters up here, turning them slightly to a different angle. They reached the cabin as the last light was going gold over the western ridge. The horses were tired and glad to be home. His roan went straight to the water trough without direction. Maggie followed. Emily stood in the clearing for a moment and looked at the cabin and the slope and the sky. And Rowan watched her do it, this woman who had arrived here 11 days ago, on a broken horse with nothing but damage, and had come back now with something entirely different in her posture. "Go inside," he said. "I'll take care of the horses." "I'll help." "Emily." "I'll help," she said again, and she went to Maggie and started uncinching, and he recognized by now that arguing this particular point was not a productive use of time. They worked in comfortable parallel, the kind that develops between people who've been in close quarters long enough to learn each other's rhythms without having to negotiate them. When the horses were settled, he carried the saddlebags inside, and she came in behind him, and they stood in the cabin in the last of the daylight. And there was a moment, just a moment, where neither of them moved, and the cabin held everything that had happened in the past 2 weeks in its 4 walls. And neither of them quite knew what to do with all of it. Rowan went to the stove and started a fire. Emily sat at the table. "What happens now?" she said. "Not to the situation. To him. Garrett holds Granger through the night, and the additional marshals come in 2 days. The territorial prosecutor starts his process. Price testifies. Calhoun..." He paused. "Calhoun breaks. He has too much exposure and too little loyalty to hold. And the Harmon family." He stoked the fire for a moment before answering. "That investigation goes to a different department. Territorial, not county. It'll take longer, but it'll go." Emily put her palms flat on the table. "And us. What happens to us, Rowan? To me?" He turned from the stove. He looked at her for a long moment, and she held his gaze with the same steadiness she'd brought to everything from Price's office to Granger's front yard. "You're safe," he said. "That's the first thing." "I know I'm safe," she said. "That's not what I asked." He crossed to the table and sat across from her. The fire was catching behind him, and the light in the room was shifting to orange and warm. He folded his hands on the table and looked at them, and then looked up at her. "I don't know how to ask for things," he said. "I haven't needed to for a long time. I've gotten accustomed to not needing." "Ask anyway," she said. A pause. Outside, the mountain wind moved through the pines, and the sound of it was the most constant thing in the world, the thing that had been here before him and would be here after. "Stay," he said. "Not because you have nowhere to go, because you might want to be here." She looked at him. Her expression was the most unguarded he'd seen it. No calculation in it, no management, just her face in the firelight being exactly her face. "I'll think about it," she said. He nodded. That was enough. For now, that was enough. The prosecutor arrived from Helena 8 days later. His name was Aldrich, and he was a compact man with a gray beard and the quality of focused patience that good prosecutors develop the ability to sit with a case and turn it slowly and find every edge. He set up in Cal Alderman's back room, which Cal offered without being asked, and spent 4 days taking statements from everyone who had something to say. Emily went in on the second day. Rowan offered to go with her, and she said no, she needed to do it herself alone, and he respected that completely. He waited outside on the bench Cal had put against the front of the store, and he watched Red Ridge go about the business of being a town that was no longer afraid, which was a different business than it had gotten used to, and required some adjustment. Emily was in there for 2 hours. When she came out, her eyes were dry and her back was straight, and she sat down next to him on the bench without speaking for a few minutes. "How was it?" he finally asked. "Hard," she said. "And good. Both." He believed you. He believed the evidence. I was the evidence. She looked at the street in front of them. "He asked me about the night in the yard, about what his men did." She paused. "I told him everything, clearly. And it stopped feeling like something that owned me somewhere in the middle of saying it." He was quiet. "That's what I didn't expect," she said. "That saying it out loud in an official capacity would feel like putting something down that I'd been carrying wrong." She turned to look at him. "Like the weight doesn't go away, but you get to set it down and decide how to carry it after." "Yes," he said, because he knew that process. He'd done it 8 years ago outside a land claims office in Kansas City, in a different form, with different specifics. The particular math of setting down a weight you've been holding in the wrong configuration. She put her hand on the bench between them. He put his over it. They sat in the Red Ridge sun for a while and let the town exist around them, and didn't need to do anything else. Rowan went in the next day. He told Aldrich everything. The ride to Helena, the registry records. Price's statement, the fence line entry into the Granger property. Tom Whitmore's condition. He told him about the conversation with Price regarding the Harmon family. He told him about the non-existent ordinance cited in the boundary correction, and explained in the legal language he hadn't used in 8 years, but which came back to him clean and precise, as a well-kept blade, exactly what class of fraud it constituted, and at what level of the territorial code. Aldrich listened with his hands folded and his eyes attentive, and when Rowan was done, he said, "You were a lawyer." "A long time ago." "The bar in Kansas City." "Junior partner. 4 years." Aldrich looked at him. "You understand that the Territorial Prosecutor's Office has significant need for men who know land law and are not currently embedded in any county's political structure." Rowan looked back at him. "I understand that. I'm not making a formal offer. I'm noting that the need exists." "I heard you." Aldrich nodded and moved on to his next question, and Rowan finished his statement and shook the man's hand and walked back out into the street. He stood there for a moment with the sun on his face and a question he hadn't expected to be considering, and let it sit without trying to answer it immediately, because the mountain had taught him that most things answered themselves if you gave them the right kind of quiet. The first major reversal happened exactly 12 days after the arrest. Tom Whitmore received official notice from the Territorial Court that the boundary correction filing on his north section had been voided. The fraudulent instrument executed by Aldous Price, citing a non-existent county ordinance on behalf of the Bitterroot Valley Land and Cattle Company Granger's entity, had been struck from the territorial record. Tom's original deed, filed 30 years ago by his brother and transferred on lawful inheritance, was confirmed as the valid instrument. Tom got the notice on his porch with Clara standing beside him and his daughters at the door, and he read it twice and then handed it to Clara without a word, and Clara read it and held it against her chest for a moment, with her eyes closed. When she opened them, she looked at Tom and said, "I want to plant the south field next spring." Tom laughed, the real kind, the kind that comes from somewhere low and has been compressed for too long, and finally gets to be itself. He laughed and put his arm around her, and she let him. Rowan and Emily were at the Whitmore place when the notice arrived. They'd ridden down from the mountain that morning with supply trading in mind. Rowan had elk from a successful hunt. The Whitmores had the grain surplus he needed. The exchange that had been happening between their two households was going to continue. It appeared, and there was a comfortable regularity to that which suited both parties. Emily watched Clara hold the notice against her chest and felt something fill up in her own chest in response. Not the same thing Clara was feeling, but adjacent to it. The satisfaction of a thing completed, of a thing fought for arriving. Clara opened her eyes and looked at Emily. "You did this," she said. "We all did," Emily said. "Don't diminish it." Clara's voice was firm in the affectionate way she had. "You came off that mountain with evidence and a territorial writ, and you stood in Silas Granger's yard without flinching. Take the credit." Emily held her gaze. "All right," she said. "We did this." Clara nodded, satisfied. "Good." The twist that no one had fully prepared for came 16 days after the arrest, and it came from the direction no one had been watching. Aldous Price, who had been cooperating, who had provided a signed statement, who had agreed to testify, who had been staying in Helena under an informal understanding that his cooperation would factor into the prosecutor's decisions, Aldous Price disappeared. Not dramatically. He left his office one evening and did not return to his boarding house, and was not seen again in Helena. When Garrett sent word down from the Capitol, Rowan was at Cal's store. He read the message twice, standing at the counter, and then set it down. "What's it say?" Cal asked. "Price is gone." Cal was quiet for a moment. "Does that hurt the case?" "We don't need Price to prove the ordinance doesn't exist," Rowan said. "That's in the registry. The index is the index. The fraud is documented in the public record regardless of whether Price testifies." He turned the message over in his hands. "But it changes the picture of what Granger is." "How?" "Because Price wasn't afraid of us. We gave him a clear path, cooperate, testify, reduced exposure. He had every reason to stay." He looked at Cal. "He ran because someone frightened him more than the prosecutor did." Cal went still. "Granger got to him." "From inside custody," Rowan said, "which means Granger still has reach we haven't found yet." He rode back up the mountain faster than he'd come down. Emily was on the porch when he came up the trail hard, and she read his face before he said anything. "What happened?" Price ran. He dismounted and told her the rest in 90 seconds. She absorbed it, standing still, processing. "Our testimony stands without him," she said. "Yes, and the registry records stand. The criminal fraud case stands." He tied the horse. "But Granger has a long arm, and there are people in this valley who haven't made a decision yet about which way they're going to face when this is over. If he can make Price disappear, he can make others afraid," Emily finished. "Yes." She looked at him. "Then we need to be visible," she said. "We can't stay on this mountain and let the town think we've finished and gone back to being separate from it. They need to see us in Red Ridge, regularly, until the trial." He looked at her for a moment. "You're talking about standing in the open. I'm talking about not letting him have the silence back," she said. "He built his power on silence, on people looking at the ground and staying inside and not speaking. If we walk in that town like we're not afraid if the people down there see two people who fought Silas Granger and are still walking around in daylight, that means something. He thought about it. He thought about 8 years on this mountain, and what it had cost to come down from it the first time, and whether coming down again was something he was willing to make a habit of. He thought about a family in Jefferson County loaded into a wagon. "All right," he said. "We go down tomorrow." "And the day after," she said. He looked at her. "You're not leaving, are you?" he said. Not a question. She met his gaze. "I told you I'd think about it. And I've thought about it." She looked at the mountain, the slope, the sky, the place where the high trail disappeared into the timber. "I want to stay, Rowan. Not because I have nowhere else to go. I have places I could go. But this is the first place in a long time that felt like the right shape." She looked back at him. "This mountain, this work, you." The word "you" landed quietly and stayed where it landed. "Then stay," he said. "I intend to," she said. They went to Red Ridge the next day, and the day after, and the day after that. The first day they just walked the main street and went to Cal's store and bought what they needed and spoke to people. The second day, Emily stopped to speak with a woman she'd seen at the edge of town, young, tired-looking, with the particular watchful quality of someone who had been working for someone like Granger and was now trying to figure out what the new landscape looked like. They talked for 20 minutes while Rowan waited outside and didn't look impatient. When Emily came back, she said, "Her name is Ruth. She worked the Granger kitchen after me. She saw things. She'll testify." Rowan looked at her. "How did you convince her?" "I told her I was afraid too," Emily said, "and that I testified anyway, and that it helped." She paused. "And I told her Aldrich was a fair man, which he is." She paused again. "And I told her what Granger's men did to me. All of it. The way I told Aldrich." "That's not easy to say twice." "No," she said. "But it's easier the second time. And by the third time," she looked at him. "By the third time, I think it might start to feel like information instead of injury, like you said about Missouri." "Takes longer than 3 times," he said honestly. "I know, but it starts." Ruth testified the following week. She was the first of 4 women who came forward in the 10 days after Emily made herself visible in Red Ridge. All of them had something to say. Some of what they said was about the land fraud. Some of it was about other things. Older things, things that predated Tom Whitmore and the boundary correction and went back to when Silas Granger had first arrived in this valley and begun the slow, deliberate process of acquiring everything in it. Aldrich's office became very busy. The trial date was set for October in the territorial court at Helena, before a judge who had no connection to Bitterroot County and owed Silas Granger nothing. On the day the date was announced, Rowan rode into Red Ridge alone. He tied his horse at Cal's and went inside and put the supply order on the counter and waited while Cal filled it and thought about the question Aldrich had put to him in his careful, non-committing way. "I need to talk to you about something," he told Cal. Cal put down the salt and looked at him. "The territorial prosecutor's office has need of someone who knows land law and territorial jurisdiction," Rowan said. "Someone not embedded in county politics." Cal studied him. "Are you asking me or telling me?" "Thinking out loud," Rowan said. "I gave up law because of the kind of work it was. Going back to it is different work," Cal said. "Different kind. You'd be on the right side of the instrument this time." "I know that." "Then what's the hesitation?" Rowan looked at the counter for a moment. "The mountain," he said. "The cabin. The life I built up there. That life still exists," Cal said. "The mountain doesn't move. The cabin doesn't evaporate." He picked the salt back up and kept packing the order. "A man can have 2 things, Hale. Doesn't have to choose the way you've been choosing." He paused. "Besides, from what I can tell, you've already got someone up there who thinks about things differently than you do." Rowan said nothing. "Might be she has thoughts about this," Cal said. "She might." Rowan agreed. He rode back up the mountain with his supply order, and what he'd said to Cal sitting in him, the way important thoughts sit not loudly, not demanding immediate resolution, just present and patient and waiting for when he was ready. Emily was in the cabin when he got back at the table with Tom Whitmore's journal open in front of her. He'd asked her to read through it again, looking for anything they might have missed that Aldrich could use. She did it the way she did most things, thoroughly and without complaint. She looked up when he came in. She read his face. "What are you thinking about?" He told her. About Aldrich, about what it would mean, about what it would require in terms of time in Helena and time off the mountain, and the particular cost of stepping back into a professional life after 8 years of deliberate distance from it. She listened to all of it without interrupting. When he was done, she put her hand flat on the journal and looked at it for a moment. "The family in Jefferson County," she said. "You've been checking on them every year." "Yes. That's not a man who left the law behind," she said. "That's a man who took it with him and carried it in a different form and waited for the work that was worth doing." She looked up at him. "This is the work, Rowan, right here. This valley, these people, this case. And if Aldrich is right, that there are more valleys that need this kind of work, more counties where someone has built what Granger built." She stopped. Let it complete itself in the space between them. "I know," he said. "Then you know what the answer is." "I know what the answer is," he agreed. "I'm still getting used to it." She nodded. She understood that part. "Take your time," she said, "but not too much." He almost smiled. "Yes, ma'am." She looked at him with that expression that had been developing across 3 weeks, the one that had moved through caution and calculation and trust and partnership and had arrived somewhere he didn't have a single clean word for, but that he recognized the shape of in the way you recognize a trail you've never been on, but know goes somewhere worth going. "I'm not going to stop being afraid of things," she said. "I want you to know that. I'm not transformed. I'm not cured of the things that happened. I'm still going to wake up some mornings and need the mountain to be quiet, and I'm still going to have days where I don't want to be visible in that town at all." "I know," he said. "And I'm going to be useful," she said. "I'm going to testify and find Ruth others like Ruth and go to Helena when Aldrich needs it and build something in this valley that isn't built on fear." She paused. "I just need you to know it's going to be both. The hard days and the useful ones. Both." "That's all anyone is," he said. "Hard days and useful ones." She nodded. And then something in her face settled, not the settling of someone who had given up, but the settling of someone who had arrived, who had traveled a long and costly distance and come out the other side and planted both feet in the new ground. The October trial lasted 4 days. Rowan testified on the second day, standing in a territorial courtroom for the first time in 8 years, in a suit he'd borrowed from Tom Whitmore because it was the right size, and he laid out the evidence in the clean, exact language of a man who understood the law and was no longer afraid of what it could do. Emily testified on the third day. She stood in the witness chair with her hands folded in her lap and her voice clear and unbroken, and she told the courtroom what she had heard and what had been done to her, and what she had done in response. She did not look at Silas Granger when she told it. She looked at the judge, and at Aldrich, and at the jury, and she spoke to them directly, one human being to others. "This is what happened. This is true. I was there." When it was over and she walked out of the courtroom, Rowan was in the corridor, and she stopped in front of him and looked at him with dry eyes, and a face that was not all right, not fine. Not any of the simple words, but something more specific than those. Something that meant, "I did it. I said it all, and I'm still standing." "You did well," he said. "I know," she said. The verdict came on the afternoon of the 4th day. Silas Granger was found guilty on 4 counts of filing fraudulent instruments with the territorial government, 2 counts of conspiracy to commit fraud, and 1 count of obstruction of a territorial writ. The jury deliberated for 2 hours and 20 minutes. The foreman read the verdict in the particular flat voice of someone delivering something heavy, and was glad to set it down. Calhoun had pled before the trial began, and would serve 2 years reduced for cooperation. 3 of Granger's men pled to lesser charges. The territorial court appointed an interim county sheriff. Within the week, a man from Missoula, with no ties to Bitterroot County, and no opinion about it beyond doing his job correctly. Price was found 3 months later in Colorado. His statement had been used in the trial through the evidentiary process, and his disappearance had been treated as an additional point of evidence regarding Granger's reach. He was extradited and would face his own proceeding in the spring. Granger received 7 years. When Rowan heard the sentence, he was standing outside the courthouse with Emily and Tom and Clara, who had ridden to Helena for the verdict. Clara heard it and nodded once, the same single nod she'd given everything she'd decided about, and was done deciding about. Tom put his hand on her back, and she leaned into him for a moment and was straight again. Emily looked at Rowan. 7 years, she said. Yes. Is it enough? He thought about it honestly. It's what the law could do, he said. With the evidence we had and the charges that held. Is it the full measure of what he owes? No. He paused. But it's real. It's recorded. It's permanent. And the land comes back to the people he took it from, and the county gets rebuilt, and the people who were afraid in those doorways get to stop being afraid. That's not nothing. She held his gaze. No, she said. It isn't nothing. They rode back to Red Ridge that evening, all 4 of them on the long road south, and the valley came up to meet them in the autumn light. The grass turned gold, and the cattle on the slopes looking like small dark shapes against the hillside. It looked for the first time in 3 years like a valley that belonged to the people living in it. In November, Rowan wrote to the territorial prosecutor's office. He accepted the work Aldrich had described not as a full-time position, not as something that would remove him from the mountain, but as what Aldrich had originally implied it could be: a consultancy, available when needed, on land cases specifically. His knowledge of territorial registry law and fraudulent instruments was, Aldrich confirmed in his return letter, exactly the kind of thing the office lacked and required. He read the letter at the table in the cabin on a November morning, with the first cold coming through the gap under the door, and the fire going steady, and Emily across the table with a cup of coffee, and Tom Whitmore's journal, which she'd been using to draft a formal complaint about the Harmon family situation that would go to the territorial office for criminal investigation. Aldrich confirmed, Rowan said. She looked up. Good. It'll take me to Helena sometimes, 2-3 times a season. I know, she said. I'll come when it's useful and stay when it's not. He folded the letter, looked at her. She was already back to the journal pen, moving across her draft face, concentrated and calm, and thoroughly at home in this chair, at this table, in this cabin, on this mountain, in a way that was not the comfort of someone settling for something, but the comfort of someone who had found the thing that fit. He put the letter in the inside pocket of his jacket and picked up his coffee and looked at the fire. Outside, the mountain was doing what the mountain always did. Being patient, being present, being exactly itself. The wind came through the pines on the slope and made the sound it always made. The sound that had kept him company through 6 winters and would keep him company through many more, except now it was keeping company with 2 of them. He thought about the family in Jefferson County. He thought about how he'd checked on them every year. This year he would write instead of just looking. He would write and tell them not that justice was perfect, or that the law always worked, or that the cost of what had been done to them had been fully accounted for. He would not lie to them, but he would tell them that a man who knew how their story had gone had used what he learned from it to do something different in a valley in Montana, and that 3 families were on their land tonight who might not have been, and that the man who had taken from them had helped indirectly to restore something for others. He didn't know if that letter would mean anything to them. He thought it might. Emily set down her pen. The Harmon complaint is done, she said. I need you to read the legal language in the 3rd section. He set down his coffee and took the paper she held across the table. He read the 3rd section, found one phrase that needed adjusting and told her so. She made the change without argument. Better? She asked. Better? He said. He handed it back. She read it again, nodded. Set it down with the particular satisfaction of someone who has built something correctly and knows it. She picked up her coffee. He picked up his. Outside, the November wind moved over the Bitterroot Mountains the way it had moved over them for 10,000 years and would move over them for 10,000 more, indifferent to individual human lives, to the particular struggles and costs and small hard-won victories that played out in the cabins and towns and courtrooms below it. The mountain did not care about Silas Granger or the territorial court or the deed to the Whitmore North section or the Harmon family's missing years. The mountain did not keep accounts, but the people on it did. And in the cabin on the north slope, in the particular quiet of a November morning that carried nothing in it but fire and coffee and the sound of wind, and two people who had arrived at the same place by entirely different roads and found against all reasonable expectation that it was exactly where both of them were supposed to be in that quiet. Something that had been broken for a long time was not broken anymore. Silas Granger had believed he owned the valley. He had never owned the mountain. And the mountain, it turned out, had always known exactly who it belonged to.